What's up, everyone? This is Mike Casu, and you're listening to the Brute Strength Podcast. This week, I interviewed Nick Fowler, who is the Director of Strength and Conditioning at Brute Strength. We brought him on board because he is a programming guru, so I thought it would be interesting for a lot of you who are coaches and athletes to hear us talking about the way that we program, the way that we assess athletes, the way that we get people ready for the open regionals and CrossFit Games. So we talk about a lot of different things, technical, general, etc. Stick around for the end because we're giving away something huge for free that all of you can cash in on. Before we get started, if you would, please go to iTunes, leave me a review, or you can go to brutestrengthtraining.com/podcast/reviews. Enjoy the show. What's up, Nick? Thanks for doing this, man.
Yeah, excited to be here.
As am I, dude. Let's start off. I think there are a lot of people out there that don't really know you. Let's start off by talking about your background a little bit, how you got into coaching and programming for CrossFit athletes.
Yeah, that's a great question. Let's see. I guess start with a little bit of my own athletic background. I played lacrosse, kind of football growing up, East Coast. Played a little bit at the college level, and then just like everyone else, after college, kind of team sports, kind of goes away. And at that time, I got introduced to rock climbing, kind of alpine climbing, in the big technical mountains, the Himalayas and the French Alps, and spent a lot of time in Yosemite climbing, and that was really the first time where I really kind of started to get interested in how to make myself better, a better athlete, and starting to take a little bit more scientific approach. Just started reading a lot and really becoming fascinated with human physiology and training methodologies and things like that. And really shortly after that, and I kind of, I think it was 2006 that, I had a friend mentioned, this thing called CrossFit, right? And I was like, oh, what is it? And I remember there was no affiliates, here where I lived in Salt Lake at the time. And so I went on to, .com and basically pulled the work out of the day, and it turned out to be Murph, and I had no idea what that meant or what it meant or anything. And I remember everybody's got probably a similar experience where they looked at it and looked at their first workout, and I thought it was, oh, that's easy, run a little bit, push-ups is like everything I was good at.
Right. And
it just crushed me. And an hour and a half later, I was laying on the floor just wondering, like, what happened? Like, right. I don't understand. Like, just doesn't make sense.
And I love it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And really that was really the Kool-Aid, right? I was like, what is this CrossFit stuff? And, just kind of other experiences like that, that kind of really, just started thinking that, the singular structure, back and buys and a little bit of running and some calisthenics really just, was kind of the old way of training. And so, that was my introduction to CrossFit. And from there, pretty early on, I've always been interested in working with individuals and small teams, and so I started to kind of play around, write my own programs, and for people I was working with, and using CrossFit methodology and other things I'd learned along the way, and I love it. And then I think in terms of CrossFit athletes, I think it is really the most satisfying type of coaching that I've experienced. You talk about a complex sport with complex athletes, and and there's just so much going on. Not to mention the competitive season. You just never know. I mean, you look at the regionals that have come out this year so far, and we're just one regional in, but it's already kind of throwing the some some big curveballs at folks.
Right.
So it's, yeah.
For a strength and conditioning coach, I think it's the most challenging sport that I've coached, for sure. There's just so many different pieces, and you're almost, you have your strength and conditioning stuff, but you're almost like a position coach or something like that in another sport, because you are their sport specific coach as well. So it has that added kind of excitement factor.
Yeah, right. I think, those two blend, right? You can't ignore trying to understand someone's skill, right? How to cue them, how to get them better. And also, the actual training stimulus you're actually getting need to kind of match up, which is pretty cool. Never thought about it that way.
Who have been your biggest sources of education, whether it be formal or informal, in programming and coaching?
Oh gosh. I think, looking back, I think some of the books that I read early on, Mel Siff's Super Training, Charles Poliquin's classic.
The tip of the day.
Exactly, right?
Thousands.
Yeah. I think those were the two, some of the first books that I read. I think Mark Twight, in the early 2000s was an influence for me, just with like threshold training and things like that. But I think one of my biggest mentors for sure is Max Elhaj, right? I was lucky enough and the privilege to know him and work with him for quite a while, and he's definitely molded me into part of who I am for sure. I think Lyle McDonald's stuff is fantastic. I think some of his nutrition stuff is pretty cool, and some of his endurance observations are really powerful. I think it's kind of a smattering of kind of this old guard classics, right? Between, and then just my evolution of a coach and my coming up. And trying to understand, okay, well, what is this CrossFit thing? And the use of CrossFit is a little different than the sport of CrossFit, and really trying to understand, okay, well, what does it take to create a CrossFit athlete? And especially these days, right? In the past 5 years, it's changed so much. I think, and I think the common thread through all my mentors, which I've really resonated with, and that I use, is this empirical, way of thinking about things, right? Like taking information, using that information to, either progress or regress, someone's training.
What does that mean exactly?
Yeah, so I think, it's really easy to, write a training session. And, something as simple as saying, okay, well, we're going to do back squats today. And so is that good or bad, right? Well, a back squat isn't good or bad, and if you say, well, you put it in some context around, well, this person doesn't have the range of motion to squat well. Maybe their priority isn't squatting, right? Maybe, maybe their squat is 500 pounds and their deadlift is 450 pounds. So then all of a sudden it starts to put in some context saying, well, squatting, even though it's not bad, might not be a good thing. So this is where, when we talk about empirically driven process, right, where the results of training, the results of assessing, or the results of testing are the pieces that create someone's design, that allow allow us to really make adjustments in training to ensure that the stress imposed is the stress that we want. I think a lot of times it's missed, especially with this day and age where you can pull, free training off the internet. Blogs are pretty, easily accessible, and kind of these, these training plans that are either built for somebody or the masses. And I think that, if you look at one training session, it's not necessarily a bad thing, but the question is, how do you take that one training session and successfully build upon it? So when you look down the road 9 months, right, those athletes have gotten that much better because we've adapted the training to their progress.
Right. Rather than just creating a template to have everyone follow that is, written out months in advance, that is not able to change, with the athlete, right?
Totally. Yeah. And I think information is the only way to really have that be a living process, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So let's talk about programming a little bit. It's, every coach wants to know how to program for their athletes. Every athlete wants to make sure their coaches know how to program. And it's kind of hard to talk about in detail over audio especially, but I really want to talk about some of the more general ideas on this podcast, because you're, the reason we brought you onto Brute in the first place is because you're a programming guru, and you just speak that language really, really well. And so I want to, kind of put that out there. So first, let's just talk about assessment. The first process, or the first piece of the puzzle in the programming process, is assessing the athlete, because we can't program for an athlete that we don't know, right? So
yeah.
How do you think about assessing an athlete?
Yeah. Well, I'm definitely kind of a geek and a nerd when it comes to numbers and that sort of thing, right? And I think assessing somebody, it's impossible to know what someone needs without actually testing and assessing, right? And if the idea is saying, okay, well, we're going to say, 2017 regionals is the goal, and we know the demands of the sport within some limitations. I mean, it is changing and is dynamic, and it's the nature of the sport, but we know that, certain absolute strength markers need to be hit. We know performance markers, skill requirements that exist, right, as a standard. And so we say, okay, well, that's what's needed. And then all of a sudden it's saying, well, what do we, where are we starting? And then it starts to set up a roadmap, in my mind anyways, where it's saying, okay, well, this is where we're starting and this is where we need to be. And that really starts to lay out this trajectory, right, of progressions that, we need to be able to succeed. And that's in a broad sense. I think in a very specific sense, knowing whether you need aerobic endurance work, right? You need to improve your engine, or if you need strength work. I mean, those are very basic, assessments, I guess, in general, right? But that is at the foundation of everything that should be built moving forward, right? If you need strength work and you need to get stronger, then that needs to be prioritized in your training. Where if you need to improve your engine and your aerobic capacity, then your design, your training should look very different. And I know that in my mind, assessments and testing, for I'd say a regional level athlete, should it's probably can be up anywhere between 2 and 4 weeks, depending on how much information they have previously and things like that. But that's I think it's impossible to really successfully train somebody without an assessment process.
Absolutely.
And there's a lot of different assessment processes out there, right? But yeah.
And for those of you who don't know, the way that we do it, because we program for 700 CrossFit athletes now on the different programs, we take people through a 2-week testing period, and they're the same test for everyone. And basically, we're testing each individual's results off of what we think a games or regional level athlete should be able to hit to make it to the games. And so based on so we break it into gymnastics, endurance, and strength. And whichever one is furthest from the mark, whichever group they are weakest at, then they go into a certain training program to focus on that weakness. And now we're starting to play around with some things like, sub 2 minute endurance, over 2 minute endurance, pulling versus pushing. It's a challenging thing to do for big groups, but that's kind of the direction that we're going. So basing it off of, what a games athlete should be able to do. Once you've assessed an athlete, Nick, what is your first step in creating the actual program?
Yeah, I think the first thing is timelines, right? And seasonality of where we are. The folks that are training for the games right now have a different timeline, different demands than, let's say, someone training for the Open 10 months from now. So I think definitely timeline is the most important thing. I think you need to figure out what you're training for. And what I mean by that is, right, we're training for CrossFit, the sport of CrossFit, but as we saw this year and we've seen many years, the Open is very, very different and requires different characteristics than regionals. And regionals and the games are somewhat different as well, even in sheer volume of training load. So if you're a bubble athlete on the Open side, then you should be really training towards, the Open, right? And then regionals and the games and so forth. And so that's the first thing I really think about. And then that really allows me to really create a progression based on someone's needs. And so, like, something as simple as you just take, somebody who needs endurance work, right? Someone who needs aerobic work, and they're in the endurance group. This is the time of year, assuming that you're not going to regionals, you're not going to the games. Let's say you competed in the Open. That was the end of your season, right? This is the time when just aerobic base building, right? Z1 work, really just, things like capillary density and making sure that the foundation is laid, in which can be built upon. So a really simple example is, CrossFit, sport of CrossFit requires a good amount of muscle endurance. And, the better our aerobic engine, the better our muscle endurance, in theory will be. And so taking the time to really lay that down now, so when we start really, tuning up the intensity and prepping for the actual season, you have an aerobic base and an engine that really can support the high volume, the demands of training that muscle endurance, right?
And if endurance, just to break it down a little further for some of you, if endurance is a pyramid, this base is basically this low slow cardio between 130 150 beats per minute on average, doing 2 to 4 hours a week of this is going to increase the size of that base, so that when you start really getting into your open prep, you can build that pyramid a lot higher. Is that accurate, Nick?
Yeah, 100%. And I think that's a big part that folks are missing, right? I think people are just intensity, volume, CrossFit all the time, and definitely you need exposure to metcons and CrossFit and the sport for sure, but the base, right? Like the wider the base, the higher the peak. Mm-hmm.
So what's the next step after that? So you've got your timeline, where you want to get to. And so let's take someone who needs to get stronger, right? They really struggled on the clean portion of, what was it, workout 2 in the open, and they basically need their weightlifting and their squat to go up, right? What do they need to be focused on now? Maybe 3 months from now, 6 months from now, that kind of stuff.
Yeah, great question. So I'd say now, right, it's just really slow strength, right? Absolute strength, probably with a priority in structural strength. And so what I mean by that is just like looking at making sure that single leg metrics are where we want them, right? Glute function is there. Just basic hamstring development, right? Can you do glute ham raises? Is your squat and your deadlift ratios where we want them? Basically just laying a foundation of just just real kind of strong man type of strength, physical resiliency, for lack of a better term. And I think it's important when you look at structural strength and making sure that folks are structurally balanced now, where there's slow strength involved. So that might be something like, just a back squat, 5x5, linear progression. So we, take a 5x5 at, 72% and then run somebody through. We would maybe run you through, a 4 or 5 week progression, increasing the percentages. And so it's very basic, very, pretty straightforward this time of year. Fast forward to 3 months from now, I think, things kind of start to speed up, right? 3 months from now, we know that, structurally you can handle a little bit more of a dynamic load. You've built the physical resiliency to handle the volume of training. And so volume of training kind of starts to increase. Maybe at that point, you're seeing a lot more Olympic lifting. Olympic lifting is always in your design, but the focus and the loading in Olympic lifting might increase, 2-3 months from now, where it becomes more of a priority in terms of laying that foundation, if we're talking about the clean and open workout number 2 specifically, right? And so, clean pulls, Matt Bruce is just the I think one of the, pinnacles in terms of, Olympic lifting coaches. And he is just fantastic about, ensuring that progressions are in place to get people really, really strong. It's cool to see. And so laying it out, we can start, speeding things up, rep ranges maybe drop, load tends to increase. And then that really kind of allows us, 6 months from now, to become, very sport specific, right? Where dynamic load is huge. We're starting to incorporate breathing work with heavy lifting, right? So you might have, EMOMs of power cleans at, 88%. And that's where, structural strength, the base, just the volume of work that we've done, all the skill that, really maybe 3 months in from now, the skill starts getting hammered. So where we end up 6 months from now is a skilled athlete with a capacity that can cycle a barbell, for 8 minutes at a very high percentage load in preparation for something like the Open or regionals.
Mm-hmm. Can you get stronger doing metcons?
Right?
I just kind of lobbed that one up.
Yeah, right. I think you can, but I don't think you can get stronger by only doing metcons. I think you need strength work. Unless you're really weak. If you're really, really weak already, then really any kind of heavy metcons can get you strong. But metcons it's a funny term, right? So if I said something like, hey, 5 back squats at 80%, 200 meter row for 6 rounds, is that a metcon? right? I mean, I know we would classify that as an IWT, but if we're calling that a metcon, will that get someone stronger? Yeah, but if your definition of a metcon is, I don't know, wall balls, box jumps, and burpees, then, you need heavy weights, right? Like if you want to get stronger, you need to load up the barbell. And I think that the one thing that metcons don't allow is this very systematic, progressive approach. And what I mean by that is like metcons tend to be somewhat random, and there's no progressive nature to them. So, the way we get stronger in strength work is 1 week we stress you with, let's just say, 100 pounds, right? And then the next week, hopefully you've recovered and your body is kind of signaling, saying, oh my God, you tried to kill us with 100 pounds last week, so we don't want that to happen, so we better get stronger, right? And so in the process of recovery now, we say, okay, instead of 100 pounds this week, we're going to say lift at 105 pounds. And that's a simple, like, linear progression example, but that's how we get stronger, right? And I think metcons tend to be a little bit more random, which some people respond really well to, but I think that doesn't really support long-term athlete development when in regards to strength.
Right. Yeah. My opinion on this, if you have not been strength training or doing CrossFit for 6 months, literally anything is going to get you stronger, right? Do whatever you want to do, whatever is most fun, because it's all going to work, and it's going to work really quickly. Mm-hmm. But after 6 months to 12 months, most people will start to hit plateaus on strength and especially power development. And that is when you need to separate your strength and power work from your cardiovascular work. What are some of the numbers, Nick? Now I'm specifically talking about, let's say people, they know they need to squat, deadlift, they need to do weightlifting separate of metcons. But one thing I see, and it's kind of a fine balance, right? You have to do this sometimes, but people will lift and then they'll do like some hellacious endurance, type effort right after. What do we need to keep in mind with this? Like how long do we need to rest before we're doing metcons and endurance stuff? How many days in between, that kind of stuff?
Yeah, no, those are good questions. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of, literature in the kind of classic strength and conditioning world that says, you need, 48 hours to recover the cardiovascular system, and, you can train muscle groups that's, up, I don't know, depending on the volume, they say up to 72 hours. But I think one of the challenges with looking at timelines like that in the classic strength and conditioning world is that we're kind of dealing with a different stimulus a lot of the times that is hard to place. And so what I'm getting at is, I think from what I've seen and in my experience, there's some kind of general guidelines. And the general guidelines that I always tell my athletes and that I believe in is that if you're an aerobic athlete, meaning like if your essence is endurance and you're really trying to get stronger, you should separate your strength work and your endurance work, or your metcons or the sport or any heavy breathing, by at least like 4.5 hours. And I think that's kind of a magic number for a lot of reasons. 4.5 hours allows you to finish a workout, get your post-workout in right away, get your meal in 90 minutes, somewhere in there. And that'll allow you about 2 hours before you train again. And that's just enough time to kind of digest your food and kind of, be able to train again without, a big old like Thanksgiving dinner in your belly type of feeling. So just the timing of that logistically works out, but then also, about 4 or 5 hours is really, I think, a really good kind of just a good general guideline to follow. I think that, concurrent signaling can be a big, I don't know, it can kind of undo a lot of the work that a lot of people are trying to do. And if you think about what happens, right, like you go in and you stress your body in a certain way in strength work. And then after that, if you do this, giant metcon that, you just destroyed yourself in and it's just, kind of laid you out, so to speak. You got to think about what signals you're giving the body and in general, and it's not this straightforward, but in general, whatever stressed you the most is generally what your body is going to adapt to, right? Because it sees it as the biggest stress. And so, separating that allows you to strength train, right? Stress the body, recover a little bit. Your body is going to recognize that as a stress and try to adapt from it. And then there's this clear separation. You can go into strength work, I think that's kind of, my take on strength work. Aerobic work, a lot of people don't think about this as the same way, right? You see a lot of people heavy breathing every single day, sometimes twice a day, with 10 training sessions a week. And some people can adapt from it fine. And there's different types of breathing, right? There's like your grinder type of breathing, and there's like your, short-lived kind of sprint stuff and your long, easy stuff. But in general, I think if you think about your cardiovascular system as a muscle, it can help put things into perspective, right? If I said, hey, we're going to do curls, right, 7 days a week, you'd be like, hell no, like you're crazy, mm-hmm. right? But then if you say, hey, we're going to go run 400s and breathe heavy every single day, most people would be like, oh, cool, yeah, that makes sense, right?
That'll get me better at CrossFit.
Totally, and that's just some of the randomness that I think you got to look at the recovery mechanisms at play, right? Mm-hmm. So I don't know. Is that kind of
no? Absolutely.
Makes sense a little bit.
Yeah. And the take home message, I think, for a lot of people should be that that piece about concurrent signaling. So concurrent signaling is more than one hormonal signal going to your body, right? You're stressing yourself in so many different ways that your body doesn't know what to do with it. So the effects are lessened in every direction. So you don't get as strong, you don't improve your endurance as much, right? All of them are lessened because you're sending all of those signals at the same time. So you need to, as a coach, you need to look into more, you need to play around with what works for certain athletes, what works for all athletes. And if you're an athlete, you need to be looking for a coach that knows, a little bit about that, or just do your own research. Because a lot of times you're just going to be spinning your wheels, right? It's not just as simple as figuring out what work to do and just doing it all, right? The timing of this stuff can be very important.
Yeah. And one thing to really, I think the biggest thing that I see in CrossFit with regards to what you're talking about is just the lactate system, right? So that feeling of just being laid out, feeling sick, proud that you just threw up, kind of, just that gut wrenching Fran feeling. Mm-hmm. I mean, everybody knows that. That is a huge lactate response, right? And so that is such a powerful stressor. And usually, that type of training session doesn't really develop an aerobic system, where a lot of people think that if you don't work hard, you're not working on your engine. And really, the accumulation of lactate in your system is the quickest way to blunt, right, or stop aerobic development. So even though you think that being laid out on the floor, making sweat angels, can't drive home for 45 minutes type of thing is actually what what you need to do to get better. It could be really detrimental. And in general, like I look at, like probably max 4 times a week, you could do some sprint work. And I'm talking like, 8-10 second sprints type of thing. A couple times a week, maybe max 3, you could do some lactate training, but they need to be kind of separated by, 72 hours, I'd probably say, and really only leading up to the final months of competition is really where 3 training sessions would really be beneficial. And then the aerobic system, you're looking at maybe 2-3 times a week. And that's not confused with like all your breathing, right? We're not saying like, you can only breathe 2 times a week. But like the example I made before, like an 8-minute EMOM with a barbell isn't necessarily purely an aerobic session, right? And so that'd be more like a grinder barbell session. So, So I think that general guidelines, that's kind of how I think, right? Mm-hmm. And every group, every individual is a little bit different. And I think that goes back to looking at, assessing what, who we have, what we're trying to do, and then the effects on those people, right?
Right. So most people, and we're already talking about this, I want to just define it a little bit more. Most people need to get stronger, but they can't afford to really lose their endurance a lot of times because they're competing year round and stuff like that. And also, one of the biggest problems is mentally, people when they don't feel like they're as good at their metcons, they mentally just check out of the program. So what we found over the years is how can we keep people in as good of shape as possible throughout the year, but also build strength as quickly as possible. So how do we get people stronger and avoid losing as much endurance as possible? Take us through like maybe a 2-week period.
Oh gosh. Okay. So I think the first thing is if the focus is getting them stronger and not losing endurance, right? Like the first thing we set up was like, okay, what's the priority? Like, what are we anchoring in those 2 weeks, mm-hmm. right? Are we, getting them stronger and their endurance work is secondary, or is their endurance work primary and their, strength work secondary? It's not that we're not working on both of them at the same time. It's just the way I think about it anyways is I build those 2 weeks around the priority. So let's just say that it's strength work, right? So I would lay out strength work within those 2 weeks, and I'd probably want to separate the strength work, let's say, at least probably 36 hours, and I'd just make sure that like joint patterning so that, overuse injuries are mitigated. We don't want to squat, 3 days in a row or, simple things like that. And so that's the first thing I kind of lay out. And then it's really kind of fun to take in, the metcons, the endurance work, and start placing it around that. And really just making sure that saying, okay, if I'm going to play something on Monday PM that's heavy breathing, when is this athlete going to be recovered for another heavy breathing session, right? It might be Wednesday morning, right? Mm-hmm. And so then I'm saying, okay, Monday evening, Wednesday morning, like Friday evening, and then maybe Saturday morning. And then all of a sudden, the design, the program starts to take shape, and then that allows us to, maybe put in some gymnastic skill work, right? Some, grinder work, some odd object stuff, whatever it is. So it becomes a really kind of fun process, mm-hmm. I think. So that's how I lay it out. Over the course of 2 weeks, I think, week one, we can say has a certain amount of volume and a certain amount of intensity. And I'm always trying to do, and I'm always trying to think about, okay, are we trying to increase endurance characteristics, or are we trying to increase power characteristics? And if the goal is to increase enduring characteristics, then usually there's an emphasis, not always, but usually an emphasis on increasing volume through those weeks. If the focus and the intent is to create a more powerful athlete, right? And in this example, if we're anchoring those strength training sessions, then the idea is to make sure we progress intensity, right? Intensity could come through loading, right? We're just going to demand heavier weights, create a linear progression. It could be something as asking you for the same power output on a metcon, but with a shorter time duration. So there's a lot of ways we can do it, but those are the kind of simple things. I always ask myself is like, are we trying to improve endurance characteristics, or are we trying to improve power characteristics? And with that process, it kind of starts to take shape and things like that.
Right. Yeah. And one of the key things that you're talking about here is protecting the intensity of the workouts. I think there's more and more of this focus on volume. You see people doing 5 metcons in a day, right? Where the entire CrossFit philosophy in the first place is based on intensity. They say nothing about volume, right? So I would rather an athlete go 3 days a week at 100% than 5 days a week at 80%, right? We're not, we can't show up for regionals and just make it through the weekend. Sure, that's fine, right? Most people won't even be able to make it through, but we have to be able to bring the utmost intensity to every single workout. And if we're not practicing that all year long, right, we're just doing metcon after metcon after metcon, just trying to get through the work, we get a much different result, right?
Completely. Yeah, and I think I think you hit the nail on the head, and I think you see that a lot, right? I think, and part of it is, I think the folks that we look up to, right? The Rich Froning, right? 5 training sessions in a day, and not understanding exactly what he does and why he does it, and
right.
basically
or how he got there.
And that's the key, right? Is that this idea of like confirmation bias, where if I'm I am who I am, and if I'm saying, oh, I want to become like Rich Froning, so I'm going to do what Rich Froning does, like I'll break, right? It's like taking a middle-aged female and saying you want to get her strong, and then using Bulgarian training methods where those were all proven based on like 20-year-old genetically gifted, synthetically supported.
All the supplements.
Yeah, totally. And expecting the same results. Not to say that isn't a bad, idea, or it wouldn't work, but
right. It obviously works, but for a specific person at a specific time.
Yeah. Yep. So and I think that's what I really think is something I'm excited about is the ability to have Chris Henshaw and Nick Sorrell and yourself and Adrian and Matt Bruce and these really high level coaches that understand these very intricate progressions and the demands of getting people better, and being able to organize it with those masterminds is just a fantastic, beautiful thing, and that allows me to kind of geek out in my own way when I'm putting it all together, and
right.
it's I really enjoy it.
It really is. Let's talk about some gymnastics for a second. Everybody wants to be able to rep out 20 handstand push-ups, 10 muscle-ups, etc. Can we kind of lay a foundation for what people, maybe some people can do one muscle up or one handstand push up, but what kind of base do we really need to build to allow them to do those 10 muscle ups in a row or 20, 30 handstand push ups? Like, what kind of strength work do they need to be capable of, and that kind of thing?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think CrossFit's, I think, one of those sports which I think is really awesome, right? Where you come into a gym and maybe you don't have a pull up, but you're like, oh man, I want to muscle up. Like, that is the coolest thing I've ever seen. I remember being like that, right? Like I could rep out 20 strict pull ups, and all I cared about was like, oh, I want to get a muscle up. And what I failed to do in my training early on is really lay the foundation, partly because I didn't know how to, right? I didn't have a gymnastics coach, and sure, at the time, like, I could kind of Google some videos here and there, but I was in a rush, right? I was in a rush to just, that's what I wanted. I wanted to muscle up. But I think that, the days of, rushing and cutting corners to get there have shown that there's a lot of resources out there that'll give you the tools and the foundations, and I think that that's the key, right? I think that first is mobility. If you don't have the mobility needed for some of these gymnastics, like, that's a really, really simple, not easy, but simple kind of thing you can work on, right? Improving shoulder flexibility, right? Scap mobility, even hip extension, right? All these things that are so demanding, work on your mobility. And then the second thing is movement. So, mobility, I believe, is a precursor to movement. If our mobility is limited, the way we move is going to be limited. And so working on your movement, right? And a lot of that can come in gymnastics, skill sessions, just playing around through some of the progressions that are laid out. And so, learn how to move, right? Learn how to move, through space, body awareness, things like that. And from there, if the movement is right and the movement is efficient, then look at, I think, structural balance, structural strength to some degree. Like, do you possess the stability components to safely, I don't know, weather the demands of training or even just a simple movement like a muscle up, right? And then start building the strength. And I think a lot of people cut corners and they're like, oh, like, I want to muscle up and I don't have a muscle up because I'm not strong enough. And then they start looking at only their strength development relative to muscle up. And then the mobility, the movement, and the structure suffer, which sometimes it might end up in an injury. Other times it's just like you have a muscle up, but it's ugly and inefficient, and it's now going to take you 4 times as long to become efficient in that movement because of bad habits or things that you're trying to undo, a whole bunch of different things. So I think that's how I look at it, right? And I think that the best thing you can do as an athlete is, work up that hierarchy. For handstand push-ups, we'll take muscle ups, right? Because everybody wants a muscle up. There's breaking it down into pieces. It can be a really good thing. So, I've heard some coaches throw out like, yeah, you need 3 dips, right? And 3 chest to ring pull-ups. And then you really have the capacity of a muscle up and things like that. And sure, that could be like a strength prerequisite. But I think, spending time developing simple skills like an upright ring hold, right? And knowing what it feels like to sit there for 20 seconds, right? In a active position, right?
That's actually I was going to throw that out there. That's the number one thing that Nick and I found when he started putting together his progression. he would see especially all of these females trying to get over the rings, and they would look super explosive, and they had no idea why they couldn't catch in the bottom of a muscle up. And then he started having the idea to have them, show me your dip, basically. And they get to the bottom of the dip, and all of those girls that struggled just collapsed at the bottom of a dip, right? Their hands start coming shaking away from their body and all of that kind of stuff. So that's one thing that almost never gets talked about. If you can't go under controlled in a dip and hang out in the bottom, then how are you gonna violently throw your entire body weight over the rings and then stabilize, right? Those two don't add up.
Yeah. And it's so it's like, okay, well then I'm just going to hang out in the bottom of a dip. And I think people kind of, say, oh, I need to work on this, and kind of just start doing it. But I think the beauty of having a really systemized, like progressive plan can say, look, this is where you're going to start. And in 3 months, you're going to have like this, incredibly beautiful ring muscle up. And, that's maybe 2 months longer than your best friend who, who maybe got it in a month, but that's just a month and 3 month timelines. Then you have the next 12 months, and that's where the glass ceiling really starts to kind of get exposed. I mean, you look at this year, right? The strict muscle ups in regionals, and if you didn't have solid foundational gymnastic skills, then you suffered, right? So yeah, I love it.
If we were to create a pyramid of importance for like building a competitive CrossFit athlete, with the bottom being kind of the first priority or the most important thing, if you will, what do you think that pyramid would look like?
Oh gosh. In my mind, there's like 3 different pyramids. There's and they're all kind of interlaced. And so I don't know if I have a specific hierarchy. But for a CrossFit athlete, I think at the first thing for sure is resources, and that might seem a little premature, but what it takes the regional athlete in terms of time and commitment and everything else, to train 3 times a day, right? Takes money, takes time, takes, just the space in life to do it. So I think, that's important. Now, it's not the end all and be all. Like, if you can't train 3 times a week, can you still participate in CrossFit and enjoy it? Yeah.
You mean 3 times a day?
3 times a day.
Right.
Sorry. Yeah. If you can't train 3 times a week, then right. It might be hard.
That's a very interesting answer, but it's so true, because there are still so few professional CrossFit athletes where like all their biggest focus is the game, or making it to games or making it to regionals. Most people still have another full-time job, right? So this, like you're saying, this resource, this time and energy requirement is enormous. I really like that answer. Keep going.
Yeah, and I think people kind of underestimate that for sure. I think so. Then there's two main pyramids, I guess, if we want to call them that. And one is like the hardware, if you will, where at the foundation of that is mobility, and then from there we're looking at structural balance, and then moving up through there, strength, and then things like speed, and then sport. And so that, when we talk about the hardware of somebody, it's like, do you have the mobility to really train, compete efficiently, right? that translates into performance as well. So
let's stop there and talk for a second. I think that is, CrossFit is puts more emphasis on mobility than a lot of sports, say like football. But at the same time, the focus is on just being mobile enough to do the movements, but not being so mobile that the movements are easy, right? The more mobile you are, the less strong you have to be. So I look at a guy like Jared Stevens, absolute freak, just so powerful, so athletic, but his overhead mobility makes it so that a lot of movements are just harder, they're painful and stuff like that. You improve this guy's mobility and he's going to the games every single year, right? But that's not usually talked about as a performance characteristic. We just look at it as, are you mobile enough?
Yeah, completely. And I think, just look at regionals, right? Look at the games. Look at your top open finishers, and I would challenge you to find somebody who doesn't move well. Mm-hmm. Like I there are people who move better than others, but I think everybody at that level moves well. So I'm a big believer in saying, look, like you need to work on mobility, right? Like that is really, really important. You don't need to have all the mobility in the world, but I believe that there are prerequisites to being a competitive CrossFit athlete. Not only from an injury prevention and a longevity in the sport kind of take on things, but from a performance side as well. And then if you move up from there and like the ability to move well, coordinated, athletic, that stuff can be trained. It's a little bit inherent maybe. And then structural strength, right? I think if we're structurally not put together, we're going to run into issues, right? And the good example is if, let's say my back squat is, 330 pounds, right? But I can clean, right? I can power clean 305, right? That might not seem like a structural imbalance, right? It might seem like more of a performance imbalance. But if you think about that dynamic load from 305 pounds and the actual load that my body has to bear, it's way more than my strength allows me to move statically. And so I think down the road that creates some issues as well. So I think that the structural balance and looking at like just basic strength numbers and balanced strength is really important.
And then what was the other pyramid that you're talking about?
Yeah, that's kind of I call it like the other 23 hours in the day pyramid. Mm-hmm. And this is in conjunction and probably ties in with a little bit of, the resources you have available. But I think at the foundation of it is systemic health, right? What do your hormones look like? What's your systemic inflammation look like? And it can tie into genetics and things like that. But I think that's kind of, knowing how to take care of yourself and make sure that, you give yourself opportunities to become anabolic is really, really important. So what I mean by that is I think that sleep is probably number one when we're talking about hormonal health and systemic health. There's so much stuff that happens when we sleep, right? It's been talked about by a million people. The repairing of everything we do, hormonal secretions, just the list goes on and on. And in a very, very basic sense, like think about the last time that you got 2 hours of sleep and how did you feel, right? I think that if you want to be in competitive in the sport of CrossFit, you need 10 hours of sleep a day. And that could be 9 hours of sleep with an hour nap. But I really think that babies and athletes need like 10 hours of sleep. And so, sleep for sure. I think lifestyle and stress, you can kind of combine those, but that's probably a close second. If you're stressed out at work, if you're stressed out emotionally, psychologically, if your lifestyle is chaotic, it's going to affect performance. And the way it'll manifest is by really reducing your ability to recover. And really, when we're talking about becoming a competitive CrossFit athlete, we're talking about the ability to recover. And that's what I think a lot of people don't maybe think of that way, right? Like as a competitive CrossFit athlete, if you're training twice a day, your whole world revolves around recovering from session to session to session. And so, with that being said, sleep, right, life stresses, all these things kind of become a huge,
it's enormous.
Yeah.
I mean, why do people take HGH in the first place? Like, why is that such a huge deal? It's so that people can recover faster. They can train harder and more often, right? What if you could release more of your body's HGH, right? Your natural store of HGH by sleeping an extra hour and a half per day? Would you do it? Probably. But people just don't understand it. They don't trust it. It's not sexy. They just don't believe it a lot of times. When I started sleeping nine and a half hours a night training for the games, dude, my performance just went through the roof, relative to me, obviously. It's just incredible the effects that a couple hours extra of sleep per day can have on you.
Totally. I heard something the other day that I have a good friend who's a trainer for some sports teams and orthopedic. He's in orthopedics as well on the sports side of things. And we were talking about low T and how they deal with it and just how it's kind of become rampant about people, searching out kind of supplements because they have low testosterone, right? TRT, things like that. And he was saying that the way he approaches, he gives them 5 things to do for 1 month. And if they come back in a month after doing these 5 things and their T levels are still low, then they'll consider it. And it was pretty interesting. A lot of it's, so sleep, right? Get 8 hours of sleep a night. Eliminate alcohol, right? Alcohol is the biggest way to blunt your hormonal system and kind of just, put it in the toilet, if you, for sure, it'll drop testosterone levels like for the next, 16 hours or some stat like that. Then eliminate soy products, right? Soy milk.
Is that including soy bacon?
Soy bacon?
That's an inside joke for my friend Marston Sawyers. He says he always talks about soy bacon.
Yeah, soy bacon. That's
so no more soy bacon.
Yeah, that just doesn't sound right at all.
Oh shit! Keep going, man.
It includes soy bacon. Don't eat your soy bacon. So like soy products, like any kind of thing that's going to increase aromatizing effects of testosterone, things like that. And then the most interesting thing he said, which those I kind of knew, but he was like, have sex. He was like, have sex every day, and that's in terms of males, right? Like stimulating the testes, like that's like a fundamental way to increase testosterone production, right? So like, it's interesting how simple things like that really increase our recovery, right, and our ability to recover. And when we talk about like systemic stress or hormonal health, it all ties back in, right? And nutrition, nutrition's probably, so we have, sleep, lifestyle, stress, and then nutrition. I'd put nutrition before training in terms of an importance. You can't obviously become or train or compete in CrossFit without training, but nutrition is something that is I think, I don't know, it's you know, it's probably the most talked about, misunderstood topic in the world. Maybe I don't know.
That's
Like,
fair.
there's so
That's
much
fair.
misinformation out there about it. I mean, there's some really good stuff out there. There's some people that are doing really, really great things.
Yeah, I would say it comes right after religion. I think it's a little more
Yeah,
misunderstood.
yeah, yeah, totally right. Although there are no wars waged about nutrition, at
Except
least
for
that I know.
pork. Just pork.
Pork, yeah, true. um, so yeah, I think those are the pyramids that I kind of think about. Those are the hierarchies in which I talk to athletes about. Right?
Right.
It's like, how are you sleeping? Right? If you're sleeping 4 hours a night, like, it doesn't matter what you're eating. It doesn't matter, the fact that you're trying to do, 2 training sessions, or like, hey, you couldn't get your last part of the AMRAP in because something came up and they're so concerned about that. But then you're like, hey, how'd you sleep last night? Oh, I got to bed like 2 a.m. because I was, I don't know, Googling whatever, watching movies, and, it's like 6 hours of sleep. And, it's the training doesn't matter at that point.
Yeah, the hardest thing for a lot of people to swallow is that if they have, less amount of time, they shouldn't try to just cram all of this work in. They should probably just do a little bit of less work harder. And most people just don't, they don't understand that, or they can't come to grips with that, right? They just want to do all the work, and then they're kind of burning the candle at both ends.
Totally. Yeah, and you can't squeeze more into what you're already doing and expect to get better without the ability to recover. And so it's really hard, right? When I have conversations with some people, I'm like, look, like, I think that, instead of doing, 17 sessions a week, we should be looking at maybe 11. And in their mind, they're like, oh my God, I'm going to get rid of 5 sessions. Like, I'm going to get like 30% weaker. Like, no, I can't do that. Like, if I do 2 more, I'll get, and it just doesn't work that way.
Right. I got one more question for you. I had 10 more, but we're running out of time. Take this question however you want. What is the most important aspect of being a coach, in your opinion?
Oh my gosh, that's a good one. I think being like open-minded and observant. I think you have to be observant. I think that's it. I mean,
observant of what?
Of everything, right? Like, don't get stuck in your dogma, right? Like, I'm going to give this person this type of training, and this is going to happen, and that's what's going to happen. And if it didn't happen, then they did it wrong, or that sort of thing. It's more of the attitude of saying, okay, I gave this person some training, and these things didn't happen the way I expected, and really saying, okay, well, why didn't it happen? And really the ability to observe that person's emotional state, right? That person's psychological barriers, right? Understand that the feedback you're getting is only the tip of the iceberg. Being able to observe not only, your athlete and what's happening there, but the decisions and the processes in which I approach things, right? And trying to deconstruct and like reverse engineer, saying, okay, well, this is what I thought was happening. Why didn't it happen? Why did I make the decision to, use this methodology in this circumstance? And, just kind of being a bit of an engineer. And I think that is, I think that is probably the most important quality of a coach. And that's not just like analytical. It's also like being able to talk to somebody about the stress in their life. Right. And so I lump that in there as well. Like, I think, to some degree, this personal connection, personal relationship with a coach is really important, right? And that relationship can be in many forms, right? And these days, there's Facebook, there's Skype, right? There's email, and however you decide and however you cultivate a personal relationship is there, but it needs to be there, right? You can't expect just to get a program off the internet and it to fit perfectly and that's going to work, right? There needs to be this feedback loop,
right? That's such a perfect answer. I read this book recently, and I promise this will have a point. I read this book recently called The Way of the Superior Man. And the book is about kind of the relationship dance between male and female, and how, we both have masculine and feminine qualities, and the way of the superior man, knows his place and when to, be more masculine and be more feminine, etc. And, rather than always trying to be this super masculine person or thinking you're masculine and you're actually feminine, I think of the coaching, like the way of the superior coach, the same way, right? We have our belief system, that's based on our education and experience, and then we watch what our athletes, our clients are doing, the results they're getting, and then we make changes based on those. And sometimes we have to do brand new things, learn brand new things to try to help these people get better, right? Because what we did the first time might not work perfectly. I think the old way of thinking is, if we have our beliefs based on our education and experience, and we give it to an athlete, and if they don't get better, then they just have to find a new program and a new coach, right?
Yeah.
So this new way of being open and moldable, pliable, is better for everyone. And it can, that's what makes it so exciting to be a coach this day and age, is we get to keep learning and mastering the art of coaching.
I love it. Yeah. Yeah. And that's, that definitely hits home, right? I think, I know for me, right, it's competitive season, right? We have regionals going on. And for me, it's so stressful, because, talking with all these athletes that are competing, I'm not that I'm nervous for them, but I realize how much hard work they've put into training, right? Dedication, right? The emotional, mental, hurdles that they've overcome. Like this is the moments that they've been training for the past year, 2 years, 5 years, who knows, right? And I feel like that's a kind of a huge responsibility as coaches, right? And when you talk about being a coach in this day and age, like I think it's tied to this relationship, and understanding your relationship with the athletes, with the sport. And so I love it. Yeah. The superior male, superior coach.
Yeah. Just made that shit up, man.
Yeah.
All right, man. This has been phenomenal. Where can people go to find you on social media, website, et cetera?
Yeah. So you can find me, let's see, I'm on Instagram at the Nick Fowler. And then Nick Fowler on Facebook. And then you can also, so I run a local gym here in Salt Lake, which is Massif Athletics. And
that's MASSIF.
That's correct. Yeah. Yeah. As in Massif, as in the mountain. So yeah, Massif, MASSIF, Athletics.
I don't want thousands of people traveling to Salt Lake looking for a massive CrossFit gym.
It's true. Yeah. Yeah. That's right. So yeah, if you're in the area, stop by, friend me on Facebook, hit me up on Instagram, and yeah, it'd be great to, anybody got any questions, that's where you can find me.
Hell yeah. And guys, we're going to try something out for the first time ever on this podcast. From today, May 23rd, when this podcast is released, until June 6th. So for the next 2 weeks, we're going to be offering the first month of games prep and compete programs for $10. And
wow, damn.
use the code BruteNick. That's BruteNick at your checkout. You're going to pay full price, and then we're going to refund you the rest until, so basically you're only paying $10 for the first month. And if you want to cancel after that, you can. But just to give a lot of new people a chance to try out our programming. And all of those programs are headed up by your very own Nick Fowler. So anyway,
I love
appreciate
it.
Nick.
Love it.
We'll talk soon, buddy.
Yeah. Thanks for the time.
All
Talk to you later.
Later.